I bring the today's speaker, who is none other than well-known Vikas Agarwal. He is the director of Specialty ENT Hospital, and he is the past president of IASSA, Indian Association of Snoring and Sleep Apnea, Surgeons for Snoring and Sleep Apnea, and he is also a transoral robotic surgeon. More than this CV, what is more important is he is already a well-known national faculty, and he is not just a national faculty, he is an international faculty where he has been invited to various international sleep society meetings as the invited speaker. I think he has been invited this year also to speak on pediatric OSA. And to add further points about him, he is the best surgeon that I have seen all across the world who has done the perfect adenoid surgery. It is like observing a painting. You can see that his strokes of wand over the nasopharynx will be like the strokes of painting brush. I am not just elating this sentence. You can see that as he is presenting in his videos, you will be observing the same. Without further ado, I'll hand over the session to Vikas Agarwal. Before he starts the session, a word of things to my fellow delegates. As he is presenting, please put on your questions side by side. You can even put on all your queries, even if it is being answered in the later part of his talk, so that I can screen those questions and I will ask those questions in priorities to Dr. Vikas Agarwal at the end of his talk. And I'll try to see that I'll try to get his answers for all the questions that has been put forth by you. Thank you once again. Vikas, you can take over.
Thank you, Sagar. You'll have to stop sharing your
I'm
screen.
doing that. I'm just trying to do that.
So, very good evening to all of you. And I think Sagar has just, out of our love and friendship, he has just spoken a little too much. I'm nervous that he has put such a big introduction. I have to live up to his expectations. But thank you, Sagar. Thank you for the moderating this session, being ready to moderate just on a single phone call, and friends up for that. So with that, let me start our talk on coblation adenoidectomy. Are you able to see my screen, Sagar?
Yeah, because, yeah.
One sec. Okay. So, one sec. You'll have to mute yourself and hide your camera, Sagar. Yeah.
I've done it.
Yeah. Okay. So now, in the next 1 hour or so, what is this? Just give me a moment to set these things before starting. Okay, so in the next 1 hour or so, I'll be talking in detail about coblation adenoidectomy. Sagar has already given an overview that what other methods have been used and why we need to discuss in so much of detail about adenoids. So we know that adenoids are the most common cause for the most common presentation of illness of children in clinics. So most common cause of most common illness of children presenting to any clinic. If it is a clinic of a general physician, a family physician, and if a child is visiting there or a pediatrician, what is the commonest reason that the child is visiting? It's recurrent URTI. Right, that's the most common, 60 to 70% or even more. Almost 3/4 of the patients at pediatrician's clinic or general physician clinics are going with recurrent URTI. So that's what we are dealing with. And of that URTI, the most common cause is adenoids in different grades. Recurrent LRTI, recurrent earaches. Commonest cause is adenoids in different grades. Even childhood asthma, as they call it childhood asthma. Okay, as the child will grow, the asthma will go away. He has a breathing difficulty, but it will go away as the age progresses. So what is that? Because the adenoids will shrink over a period of time, at least to some extent, so the asthma will go away. So that's the childhood asthma we're talking about. Headaches. Now, many a times, children present with headaches, which pediatricians are unable to understand. ENT doctors, we are unable to understand. We get the sinuses CT scan done, everything is all right, or there will be some, some mucosal thickening in the sinuses, which is actually because of stasis of, airflow in the nose, because the adenoids are large, so the child is mouth breathing. But the real cause of headache in patients of adenoids is sleep disturbance, because the child is unable to sleep. He has got pediatric snoring and sleep apnea. So his sleep is getting disturbed. He's just changing his posture every now and then. So his sleep is getting disturbed, and therefore he is getting morning headaches. So morning headaches, the moment you do a complete good adenoidectomy, within a week, the headache of the child will go away because he is able to sleep well. Now, these are things which are not really described in our literature, which needs to be described, but it's a very, very common indication that I perform the adenoidectomies for. When there's obstructing symptom, you just remove the adenoids and the headaches go away. Dumb child. If the child has got serous otitis media, then the child is unable to listen well in the class. So what happens? The child is unable to focus in the class. And if you shout on the child will listen, but if you do not shout on the child, this child will be dumb. So his class performance is low and is labeled a dumb child. It's a very, very unfortunate thing which happens. Then adenoid facies. Many children develop adenoid facies. So we all know about adenoid facies, but it's a very, very common thing that is being missed by our pediatric colleagues, by our ENT colleagues also. And another thing called bedwetting. Bedwetting is another thing that people are not really, they're aware, but they're not aware that this is because of adenoids. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and bedwetting are two things that people have to actually see that they are because of adenoids. And again, why is that happening? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and bedwetting is again only because of disturbed sleep, and disturbed sleep is because of adenoids. Just give me a moment. So disturbed sleep is actually because of adenoids. So we have to take care that adenoids do not, the child's sleep is not disturbed. Then we come to a sleepy child. The child becomes sleepy only when the adenoids, the sleep is too much disturbed, and then only child becomes sleepy. Now, this child, you saw how this child is actually disturbed in the sleep because of severe snoring and choking. And this child, you can see this child is just struggling to breathe, completely choked. So obviously it's not only adenoid, it's also adenoid and tonsil enlargement and a little bit of retrognathia, but adenoid is the major thing which causes this problem. So what is adenoid? We all know as ENT surgeons that adenoids are tissues at the back of the nose which completely block the airway. And it presents at recurrent URTI, LRTI, nebulization, recurrent needs for admission, recurrent earaches, suppurative otitis media, serous otitis media, mouth breathing, snoring, sweating, panting, and reduced energy levels. So these are the presentation of adenoids. And as I said earlier, hyperactive child, nocturnal enuresis, ADHD. If sleepy, that means it's a very severe sleep apnea, and sometimes right heart failure. In fact, I have had patients who had right heart failure because of adenoid enlargement and recurrent adenoid enlargements. So how do we diagnose adenoids? There's no need to do CT scan, MRIs. You can diagnose adenoids either on endoscopy or even on the digital X-ray of the head. Digital X-ray, nasopharynx, lateral view, soft tissue. This is the description. Digital X-ray will give you a very good definition of the nasopharynx, because adenoids are in the nasopharynx, lateral view because you have to see them from the lateral side, and soft tissue because you are not supposed to see the bones. You have to concentrate on the soft tissue. So this is the description of the X-ray that you have to order for the adenoids. And if in this you see 25% of the space of the nasopharynx is occupied by the adenoids, it's grade 1, 50% is grade 2, 75% is grade 3, and 100% is grade 4. So if you are seeing, in this case here, you are seeing almost a grade 4 adenoid between 75 to 100%. In this case, you are seeing a grade 3 or grade 4 adenoid, but this is the grading of adenoids. And lymphoid, what are adenoids? They are lymphoid tissue. So body has got a lot of lymphoid tissue, and adenoid is one of the lymphoid tissue. Now the characteristic of lymphoid tissue is that it gets inflamed. We typically call them infected, but the lymphoid tissues get inflamed in response to infection, allergy, or any kind of stimulus. So when infected, it can get inflamed. When allergic, it can get inflamed. Now, if the lymphoid tissue is inflamed, what is the best agent which can work on that? The best anti-inflammatory is steroids. So the best anti-inflammatory, because it is steroid. So if you give long-term intranasal corticosteroids, see, if you give steroid in oral form, it will work on every adenoid. So if the child is very small, you do not want to operate, give him oral steroid and a spray. The adenoids will shrink for some time. You'll get some time. But if it is grade 1, grade 2, as you can see in this X-ray here, long-term intranasal corticosteroids are very, very effective for grade 1 and grade 2. And there are n number of papers on that. And in my clinical practice, grade 1 and grade 2 adenoids, I would rather never operate or very rarely operate unless they're not responding. I will not operate. Most of them will go home with long-term intranasal corticosteroid sprays, and majorly grade 1 and grade 2 will be taken care of by that. There's enough evidence, Cochrane trials, intranasal corticosteroids for nasal airway obstruction in children, even with moderate and severe adenoid hypertrophy, it is effective to some extent. I'm not saying that it will be effective for a long, long time, but it is still effective even in moderate and severe nasal obstruction in children. It's adenoids, it's still effective. And see this paper, even moderate to severe adenoidal hypertrophy, steroids are the treatment. So the major mistakes people do, which includes family physician, pediatricians, and even some of our ENT colleagues, is that when we see patients come with a complication of adenoid. If they're having a blocked nose, they have enlarged adenoids leading to blocked nose. Blocked nose is chronic, so the patient has not visited your clinic. And then the patient has come to your clinic when the child has got a secondary bacterial infection. So he's got fever, he's got severe pain, he's got a earache. So with one of the complications, he has come to you. And then we treat the complication. But the complication is a secondary complication. What is the primary reason for that? Primary need is the adenoid. The secondary complication is bacterial infection. So we give antibiotics, we give anti-inflammatory, but we forget to treat the primary reason. So after some time, again, the primary cause, takes over. And again, the child comes back to us with the same problem. So we need to teach our pediatrician colleagues, our family physician colleagues, that if the child has come with a complication related to adenoids, please treat along with your acute management, treat with intranasal corticosteroids for a long term. They're proven to be absolutely safe. And here you can see for this paper, the current evidence suggests that intranasal corticosteroids even significantly improve nasal obstruction with moderate and severe adenoid hyperplasia. So at least even in grade 3, grade 4, it can be tried. And in fact, the intranasal corticosteroid has been even compared to a curettage adenoidectomy, because in curettage adenoidectomy, you anyway leave behind a lot of tissues. So it is so effective that what Sagar showed you in the beginning, a curettage adenoidectomy, can be compared to a steroid, medical management with steroid. So the idea is that a simple blind curettage adenoidectomy, which leaves a lot of tissues behind and leads to recurrence, is to be condemned. It's not to be done. And rather than doing that surgery, you can actually give steroid nasal sprays. So is it safe for kids? Yes, it is. There are a lot of papers on the safety of at least mometasone furoate nasal spray, and safety from the age of 6 months onwards. Mometasone is supposed to be safe even for small kids. It does not suppress the hypothalamic axis, pituitary axis, and the fluticasone furoate has been shown to be safe for the kids above 2 years of age. So mometasone is the preferred molecule in my hand for pediatric age group, and mometasone or fluticasone is the preferred molecule either in adults. In adults, both can be used. Now, grade 3 and grade 4 adenoids are definitely quite large, and they will definitely not respond for a very, very long time to only a steroid spray, because the adenoid is large, and if you're only spraying little, it will not help. You also need to give oral, and oral steroid you cannot give for a long time. Therefore, since you cannot give a steroid for a long time, therefore you need to remove the adenoids which are large, which are grade 3, grade 4. So how do we do it? The procedure is done under general anesthesia with intubation after fitness. Obviously, anesthesia fitness, general anesthesia with intubation, because you are going to operate in the nasopharynx. Though in the end of it, I will have one slide with local anesthesia, but I would not even show a video. I will not recommend, though I have done adenoidectomies under local anesthesia in situations of sleep apnea where tongue base was very large and it was very difficult to intubate, but I would not really recommend it. Then always endoscopic. Blind adenoidectomy days are gone. Always endoscopic adenoidectomy. Always, if possible, use coblation. If it is, if it can be afforded by your patient, use coblation. My talk is on coblation. You can do a blind adenoidectomy, pack it, let the bleeding stop, and then you can use coblation as Sagar showed for some time. But you will get the best results if you use coblation. And your hands will also get set over coblation if you do, say, 100 adenoids. If you want to venture into base tongue, my number that I recommend is that you should do at least 100 adenoids before you start getting into base tongue. Base tongue talk we'll have on Monday, but today's talk, learning how to use coblation to remove the adenoids, is the basis for Monday's talk on base tongue. So please listen to this talk with equal importance. So it gives you perfect hemostasis and the patient is extubated. Now, whether you should mirror or whether you should endoscope. So this is how adenoidectomies were performed when we started seeing, started learning the coblation across the globe. Everybody was using mirror and somebody was using coblation, somebody was using the monopolar cautery with suction. But see, with the mirror, this is how you will get an inverted image. So you do not get the idea of what you are dealing with. You are trying to figure out what is happening, and you're seeing it from a distance and from a mirror, and you're doing a little gross job. And this video is from one of the, busy hospitals from Europe, from US. I'll not like to name it, but this is the kind of work you will do with a mirror. So obviously, gone are the days of mirror. Everybody has an endoscope. Please use endoscope, whether you use from the oral cavity or from the nasal cavity. I will discuss into that, but please use endoscope. So because endoscope will give you such a great view. See, it's like if you're standing in the nasopharynx and operating. Now you have got endoscopic cameras which are high definition, now in 4K. This is a standard Storz camera, image 1, or now you call it SPICE. So it gives you a wonderful view. You remove tissues layer by layer, and then you see each thing so nicely. There's not a single drop of blood because of your coblation technology. And then you remove tissues layer by layer. And after I started doing this in 2000, I think 8, 9. I bought my coblation during that period, so around 10, 11 years back. And then I realized that what I was missing earlier, and then you remove all the tissues layer by layer. You see, it's like, why it's called wand? Because it's like magic, like a magic wand. It will remove tissues and you will not see even the trace of it. The tissues will disappear. And then you will come to the other side, go on the top. I'll show you everything in detail. This is just telling you the steps. And then you will go to the fascia. And that's the ultimate, because nobody in the world, history of 1.5 centuries of adenoidectomies. I think Sagar showed you the history of adenoidectomy. 1.5 century of adenoidectomy. Nobody had defined the fascia. Nobody had defined the boundaries of adenoidectomy. So with this, we could first time in 2016 March, Indian Journal of Otolaryngology, I published a paper defining the boundaries of adenoidectomy. And this process gives an advantage of complete removal with no chance of damage to eustachian tube, because you are seeing everything, complete and perfect hemostasis. And this is the paper you can look at. This is 2016, April to June 2016. You can see and this is online, you can search it online, defining the surgical limits of adenoidectomy so as to prevent recurrence of adenoids. So if you go by this article and use the boundaries that I'm going to show in each and every case, you will see the boundaries. Each and every case, you will possibly never have to deal with the recurrence of adenoids. So what are the boundaries defined in this paper? So I'm looking into the nasopharynx from the anterior aspect, and you can see the adenoids is like a weed. It's all around, and the lower part of the adenoid is the passavent's ridge. Passavent's ridge is the area where your soft palate will go and touch at the back to close the nasopharynx. So that's the passavent's ridge. The upper boundary is the periosteum on the base sphenoid, the lower part of the sphenoid. The periosteum on the inferior surface of the sphenoid is the base sphenoid, and that's the superior boundary. The lower boundary is the passavent's ridge, and the lateral boundary, anteriorly the lateral boundary is torus tuberis, all along the eustachian tube orifice, the torus tuberis, and at the back is the fossa of Rosenmuller. So this is the front view of the nasopharynx. Nasopharynx is like a box. Nasopharynx is like a box with not only one side open, not on the front open, but also the inferior side open. So with two sides open. It's a box with walls on three sides, the superior, the lateral walls, and the posterior wall. And inferiorly, it's the line, the passavent ridge, which defines the boundary. So the box is open in the front and in the inferior part. So if you put the boundaries here, how does the box look like? Now I'm showing it to you in 3D. So you see, if you are looking into the box on the side, you see the adenoids occupying the box, the buccopharyngeal fascia at the back, the basis sphenoid on the top with the periosteum below the basis sphenoid forming the upper boundary, the lower boundary being passavent's ridge, and the lateral boundary. Anteriorly, you can see that's the eustachian tube and the torus tuberis. Eustachian tube orifice I have shown in green and the torus tuberis in white, and the fossa of Rosenmuller is shown in yellow. So this is how the boundary of adenoidectomy has been defined. And if you respect these boundaries, you will never get a recurrence, and you will possibly not get a complication also. So I'll let this video play.
So here you are watching coblation adenoidectomy in a 7-year-old girl. We are starting at the upper end using coblation at the setting of 9 and 4. 9 for ablation, and we are starting from the upper end. The wand has been bent. It's going through the oral cavity. It has been bent by 35 to 40 degrees, and the 0-degree endoscope is going through the nasal cavity. So when we start the surgery, the wand at that time has to reach the upper pole. With the upper pole of the adenoid, the superior boundary, and you can see the periosteum very clearly at the upper pole. That's the upper boundary. Periosteum on the inferior surface of the sphenoid bone is the upper boundary. Once we remove the adenoids completely, they cannot regrow. And now we'll remove the adenoids layer by layer. So that we see what we are doing. And we do not have any blind area of bleeding. So that's the superior boundary. You can see the periosteum very, very clearly all around. There is no need to open up the periosteum. Any small vessel can be coagulated. So we have to look into any small vessel which is bleeding and that can be coagulated. Now we try to get into the depth of the adenoid, the posterior boundary. Posterior boundary of the adenoid is buccopharyngeal fascia. And as you reach the buccopharyngeal fascia, you will see the clear demarcation of the lymphoid tissue from the buccopharyngeal fascia. So before we reach the posterior boundary, let's define the lateral boundary. So this is the eustachian tube, this is the torus tuberous. There's a little bit of lymphoid tissue on torus tuberous, not really much. Let's see if there's any bleeding from the superior part. Okay, if there's any, first deal with that so that it does not disturb you. Now, the lateral boundary anteriorly is the torus tuberous and posteriorly is the fossa of Rosenmuller. So here I am going towards the fossa of Rosenmuller, and you can see this lymphoid tissue in the fossa of Rosenmuller. So one can have a troublesome bleeding from the fossa of Rosenmuller if there is any pharyngeal vessels supplying the adenoid which is large. Be really careful. This is the fossa of Rosenmuller. So here, don't direct your wand laterally. See what you are doing. If you are going too deep and you are not sure, then you can actually coagulate. You can go laterally and coagulate like this. Do not ablate laterally. You can coagulate. And if you are very sure what you are doing, then you can actually even ablate. But now this is the lymphoid tissue on the posterior wall. So as you remove the lymphoid tissues from the posterior boundary, that boundary is the buccopharyngeal fascia. So once I have cleared up the fossa of Rosenmuller here, now I'm going for the posterior boundary, which is the buccopharyngeal fascia. And that's the buccopharyngeal fascia. This is the fossa of Rosenmuller, completely cleared. And this is the buccopharyngeal fascia. So this fascia and this lymphoid tissue have to be differentiated. And then remove all the lymphoid tissue till the buccopharyngeal fascia. There's still a little bit of tissue which I am removing. So that's the fossa of Rosenmuller, that's the buccopharyngeal fascia. We are not supposed to open up the buccopharyngeal fascia because that will unnecessarily give pain to the child. But once we remove all the tissues till the buccopharyngeal fascia, now see how much of the adenoid tissue was actually some small ooze from here, which I have to look into. Now this was the third dimension of the adenoid. See how much of tissue I have removed in order to reach the buccopharyngeal fascia. Now we'll do a little bit of debulking here. This can be done fast because there's nothing here. If you ablate very fast, then you will not achieve good hemostasis. If you ablate very slow, if you move very slow, the neuron will get blocked. So adequate speed has to be maintained in order to get a good field and no bleeding. So this is just debulking, which I'm doing a little fast. If you need to clean up your scope, you can rub it on the tissues inside so that you don't have to come out again and again. Whatever vessels you see, you can coagulate. Now, debulking the adenoids to see the posterior boundary all around, cleaning of the scope. You can very well see the adenoid tissue being different from the fascia. Cleaning up of the tip of the wand. So, if your wand gets clogged with tissue, you can actually use a brush to clean it. But most of the time, you can just rub it on the tissue and press the ablation mode, and the tissue will be ablated and it will get cleared by itself. It's a self-cleansing process. Now here we have almost completely removed the lymphoid tissue. So that's the fascia. We are removing the tissue completely over the fascia. You see that the fascia should not get opened and the muscles should not get exposed. So that's the passiband ridge, which is the lower boundary of the adenoid. So the lower boundary of the adenoid is passiband ridge. This is the area of the passiband ridge, and you can see the muscle twitch is contracting the nasopharyngeal area. So these twitches tell you that you are very near the muscle, and the lateral things you can actually coagulate. You should not go inside and ablate blindly. So very laterally, if you see anything, you should actually just go and coagulate. If you have to ablate, direct your wand. We want to make sure that there's no tissue left there, and we are not ablating in that region, we are only coagulating in that region. If at all there's any tissue, it will get coagulated. Now we come to the left side. I can still work from the right, so I'm debulking tissues here. I can still debulk some tissues under vision. I'm doing so only till the point I'm able to see. Wherever I am not able to see, I will go from the left side and do that part. Now, that's the torus tuberous on the left side. I'll not get into that from here. I'll go from the left side. So let me first do the debulking, whatever is possible from the right side. Now that the right side is almost cleared, let me go in from the left. I have already decongested the nose. but still the posterior part of the inferior turbinate is not completely decongested. So if required, we can saline, please, saline inside the nose. Now see, this part at the choana can never be taken care of from the other side. That's it. Thanks. So you must see the choanal adenoid from the same side. Again, the superior boundary is the periosteum. So that's the torus tuberous, that's the eustachian tube. So this is all adenoid. I'll remove it layer by layer. Now we again go towards the fossa of Rosenmuller. That's the fossa of Rosenmuller. Once we clear up the fossa of Rosenmuller, we go towards the posterior boundary. That's the fascia here. So remove all the tissues above the fascia. Whatever little tissue is remaining, we'll remove it completely. And in the lateral recess will coagulate, will not ablate. Right now I'm ablating because I'm seeing where I'm going. Where I'm not able to see beyond this, you can actually just coagulate. In the lateral recess, never try to ablate because you will be in an area where you cannot see well. If you have to see that area, you can come from down with a 70-degree endoscope, or you can press the torus tuberous like this with your scope, turn it medially, and then ablate. But coagulation is the best advice that can be given. So that's the boundary of the adenoid surgery. Whatever little tissue is there, you can coagulate. This is the superiormost boundary. Choanal adenoid completely removed. And always leave a very small sliver of tissue to coagulate it. Do not open up the periosteum. So that's the boundary of this adenoid surgery for you. Thank you for watching.
So you saw that once the scope was inserted into one side, the whole thing was completed for that side, and then we went on to the other side. So to achieve a surgery like this, what are the things? What you saw in, say, around 10-12 minutes has taken me 10-12 years to master. And I'm still not a master of it. I'm still improving. So to reach to this level, it has taken me 10-12 years. So I'll give you the tricks that I have learned over a period of time. You keep the head low. If you keep the patient of the head of the patient low, the saline will flow towards that. The wound will be easier. The saline will flow over the tissues and it will not fall down. It will flow over the tissues. So keeping head low, it's not the reason that the saline will pool in nasopharynx good, but if the head is low, then a wound will be directed down and the saline will flow over the tip and it will not go down. So keep the head low. Pull the soft palate with catheter so that the soft palate does not come in your way. Stand on side like Fess. Apply Boyle-Davis mouth gag. And usually a 4 mm endoscope for a child above 4 years of age is good enough. If the child is even smaller, then you can use a smaller endoscope. But usually 4 mm endoscope is good enough going through the nose. Decongestion of the nose with adrenaline 4 ampoules in 30 cc saline or with 4% xylocaine 4 ampoules in 30 cc is very, very important, because if you do not do a proper decongestion with every entry of the scope and coming out, you will traumatize mucosa. And this blood will keep on trickling into your view and it will keep on disturbing you. So what is the position? You can see here, this patient is head low. I'm packing the nose first. So give time for decongestion. Wait for 5 minutes till your sister is starting, making your scope ready. Then you have to bend the wand. How much of bending is required? If you look at the angle from inside the mouth, behind the soft palate, and you have to go till the top of the adenoid, you will require a 90-degree angle. See this picture. But obviously, if you bend your wand by 90 degrees, it will never, the whole channels will get blocked. So what you do is, there are two bottleneck areas. One, in this picture, the mouth of the patient is closed. So open the mouth. The moment you open the mouth, you'll have more angle to work, and retract the soft palate. Now, if you retract the soft palate too much, then the soft palate will become, swollen after the surgery. So retract it till it gets comfortably retracted. So by retracting the soft palate with a catheter and opening up the mouth, this angle becomes around 35-40 degrees. Right. So the moment you open up the mouth and retract the soft palate, you can reach the top of the adenoids by bending the wand by 35 to 40 degrees. How do you bend the wand? So the wand has to bend by 30 to 45 degrees. Generally 35 to 40 is a good thing, but your minimum range is 30, maximum is 45. You won't require ever more than this, depending on the patient. So how to bend the wand? Now the wand is this long. So approximately at the junction of upper 3/4 or lower 1/4, some people do it 2/3, 1/3, but I prefer it 3/4 and 1/4. You have to bend the wand, but don't bend it acutely. If you bend it acutely, then the suction channels will get blocked. So see how it is done. A gentle bend, little by little, little by little. Don't try to do it in one go. Do a little, see how it is. Still a little more if required. But if you bend it too superiorly, it will not reach. So you have to bend the tip of it. Now see, this is almost a perfect bend. Right. So you can still bend it a little more, but it's towards the tip. This is a good bend. It's absolute. There's something called wand bender, but that is again very costly. And so do not push it in one place. Do not poke your fingers because you'll break the wand. So bend it gently. Once you bend the wand, what is the next most important thing to learn is the saline flow. The saline flow has to be generous. If the saline flow is not generous, then your plasma will not form. Now see this video, I'll play again. Saline comes out, saline comes out from here and it gets absorbed here. Let me go back. The saline is coming out from here. In the EVAC 70, it comes from around here, but it comes from top and gets absorbed here. Right? This is the active electrode. This is the passive electrode. Active and passive. Active are the wires and passive is the metal here. But the saline flows from passive to active. So the saline flow has to be from superior to inferior. Therefore, I said, if you keep the head low, then your wand will be directed low and saline flow will not fall down. It will go on to the active electrode. This is what I said when I meant head low. It will be easier for you. And if the saline flow is not there, then the plasma will not form. And if the plasma is not formed, plasma only forms here. So there are many things that you learn from this small video, that the saline will flow from passive electrode towards the electric electrode. The plasma will form from electric electrode to passive electrode, and this plasma will get absorbed into this suction tip, which is here. So if you block your mouth of the wand with the tissue, then the suction will not work. Again, the whole thing will not work. So if you keep the saline irrigation, this slide again, it was presented on the tonsil day, I'm presenting it again, because if the saline irrigation is too little, then the electrical path will be incomplete, because there will be no active flow of saline, no active plasma formation, and it will be intermittent path. So your wand will get clogged more and more, because the tissue will not vaporize completely. If you give too much of saline, then the saline will jet past the electrode. The same thing will happen if you keep the wand like this rather than like this. The saline will drip here. It will not go towards that. Therefore, if you keep the patient straight, you have to keep the wand low in this position. Therefore, keep the head low. The saline has to go on the electrode. If it is too fast, it will jet past the electrode. So again, the path will not be complete, and there will be pooling of saliva. So your plasma will try to dissipate everywhere. If the suction is too low, then again, because the products will not be sucked inside, so it will again contribute to clogging, and the saline will also not be able to be sucked inside, so it will lead to pooling of saliva. And if the suction is too much, then the plasma, before it is working, it will be sucked inside. It will be extinguished. So your electrode will wear fast, and your tissue removal will be also very fast. So it will not give it adequate time to create hemostasis. So this slide, as I said on the other day, is the most important slide to understand. And what most of the people do mistake is not to understand this slide. Settings we keep in tonsil as 7 and 3. In ablation, we have to use ablation mode. So we keep the settings at 9 and 4. 9 is for ablation and 4 is for coagulation. So as you saw in that, I entered once into the right nostril, finished my job, then once into the left nostril and finished my job. See, if you go in, out, in, out, in, out, what will happen? You will traumatize the turbinate. The turbinates will bleed. The blood will keep on fogging your scope, and your surgery will be messy. Blood will go onto the field. Your wand will not work. So remember, take your time. No, don't be in a hurry. Decongest for 5 minutes. Put your scope once. Finish your work on that side. You can flush your scope, your wand, your scope. You can touch it on the tissues and finish your work and then come out. So I have already stressed this point: clean scope by rubbing on the adenoid tissue, and irrigation from the nostril by nurse. I have shown both the steps in that video. However, you can see that step again here. So when the scope is not properly clean, then you can simply touch it on the tissues and see it's now clean. Minimum coagulation and continue ablation. See, even if there is a little bit of small bleeding, you continue ablating. The ablation is actually involving a little bit of coagulation. It's a blend. However, when you're operating at the setting of 9 for adenoids, the ablation is maximum and the coagulation is minimum. Therefore, in tonsillectomy, we only coagulate the tonsillar artery area. In adenoids, you saw that if you're a little fast, the coagulation will be incomplete. Then you go ahead and touch that part. But try to have your speed adequate, so that you minimize your coagulation and your bleeding has to stop with ablation only. Now, endoscope, whether it should be put through nose or put through mouth. So as I said, when I had started, everybody in the world was using mirror from the mouth, and people were also using endoscopes, if at all, through the mouth. But why I started advocating, I still remember in 2011, I was in Singapore as a faculty. So I was the junior most faculty at that time in Singapore in a workshop. And I showed my videos with 0 degree through the nose. Everybody said, oh, this looks better. Why don't we use it? So I am trying to explain you by this diagram, which I have made today itself to explain you that if this is the palate in say pink, the upper part is the nose. If you are looking with a 0 degree endoscope through the nose, or you have an option of looking at 70 degrees endoscope, or a 45 degree endoscope, or a 30 degree endoscope from the oral cavity. So what you will get from a 0 degree, you will see the adenoids as this. If you're looking at a TV screen from the front, everything is very, very clear because everything is in front of you. It's a head-on or end-on vision. But if you're looking with a 70 degree from down, you're looking at the posterior pharyngeal wall or the buccopharyngeal fascia like this. You're looking at it from the side. So is this better or this better? Obviously, this is better. So you view your scope, you view your adenoids with a 0 degree, and that's what I just showed you in the video. In 90% of the cases or more, I will only work with a 0 degree endoscope, and only 5 to 10% where there's not space for me to go through the nose, I'll use a 70 degree scope, because I want a straight vision with a 0 degree on the buccopharyngeal fascia. Because if I do not look at straight, if I see the buccopharyngeal fascia like this, I may injure the buccopharyngeal fascia. So this is what happens when you look at from the 70 degree from down. Not only you look it on the side on view and things are not clear for you, the buccopharyngeal fascia at the back, you know that there is a cervical lordosis. The cervical spine is concave, convex in front. So the convex part, as you see here, like this, the convex part, if you are looking from one side, will give you a blind spot beyond the highest point. So in order to reach the adenoids in that area, you will traumatize your fascia most likely at the place where the yellow arrow is kept. So that means at that point, it will be very easy for you to traumatize the fascia. Therefore, use this. This is a good technique. When there is no space in the nose, then you do not have an option. If the adenoid is grade 5, if it is projecting into the nose, if there's no space for you to put your wand inside, what you can do? You cannot look it from the nose. So what you will do? You'll have to at least, make some space to let your wand go inside. So use a 70 degree view. So use a 70 degree view, use your scope from inside in 3 conditions. One is when there are huge adenoids which are coming and blocking the choana and you cannot see it from the nose. Then you have no choice but to at least debulk the adenoid using a 70 degree. Do not go till the fascia from down if you want. And use it when you have a badly crooked septum. If you try to do a septoplasty before doing adenoidectomy, your septum, the operated area will keep on bleeding into your nasopharynx. The surgery will be spoiled. So first complete your whole surgery, almost whole surgery, with a 70 degree scope. So you should be actually well experienced also in using 70 degree scope from down. And in very small child, when there's no space in the nose, if your child is 1 year, 14 months, I'll show you a video of 14 months, there's no space in the nose even for the use of 2.7 degree mm scope, or you will at least traumatize the nose a lot. You cannot afford traumatizing the nose. So in these 3 conditions, I use a 70 degree scope from down and then tackle it. So now this is the video I was telling. Now this is a 14-month-old child. So here you see I have already pulled the soft palate with the catheter, and you can see how less instruments are there on my trolley. Now this is a very old video, but with a 70 degree endoscope, I'll just fast forward a little. So again, with a 70 degree endoscope, you bend the wand, and now there I used to start from the upper pole because I was seeing from the inside the nose. Here I'm starting from the lower pole. Now you can go horizontally as I am going, you can go vertically. It really doesn't matter. Whatever suits in your hand, you can do it. But what is important is that make sure whether you are putting your seeing it from nasal side or oral side, the back part, the back part of the palate should only be in touch with the black of your wand. Black is the rubber. You should not touch the soft palate with steel of your wand, because that's the return electrode, and you'll burn the back part of the soft palate, and it will not only hurt the child. If you burn it too much, it will result in nasopharyngeal stenosis, which is a very, very bad complication. So this video is again of 12 minutes. I will try to fast forward because there's many, many more things that I want to tell you. So I'm removing again tissues layer by layer. You can see it over here, right? I'm just doing little fast forward Now, as you reach the choana, can you see the choana now? Right. So now layer by layer, you'll remove the tissues. Since it is a small child, the distance is not much. So I'll still be able to see the buccopharyngeal fascia, but not so well. Now I was telling that this is the area besides or behind the torus tuberous. This area which I'm doing now is behind the torus tuberous, and it is not very well seen through the nasal cavity. But if you have to really clean up this area, going through the oral cavity with a 70-degree, you're bypassing the bulge of the torus tuberous, and you can go behind the torus tuberous from down and complete the adenoids right from that part with complete view. So this is one advantage of using a 70-degree from the oral side. Now, again, it's a very small child, so we cannot afford any bleeding. The maximum blood loss allowed by my anesthetist in child was around 20 ml or 25 ml. He said that if it is more than that, then you might have to give this child some kind of blood transfusion. So a very underweight child, only 14 months and absolutely underweight. And now you see still in this child, you can still achieve a complete removal, because if you do not remove the adenoids completely in this case, what will happen is that the child will come back after a few years, because this is the age for the adenoids to regrow. And one thing more that I wanted to tell you, that from this angle, you are able to see the mucoperiosteum below the periosteum below the sphenoid bone much clearly as compared to the view from the nasal cavity. But anyway, that is the periosteum. And even if you happen to open up the periosteum, nothing much will happen. But if you open the buccopharyngeal fascia, it will be a problem. So see, this is the choanal adenoid completely being removed, making sure that you are not touching the soft palate by the back side of your, by the metal of your wand. It should be only the covered part of your wand which should touch the soft palate posterior part. And this is where you have tackled the whole choanal adenoids. You can see the inferior turbinate, middle turbinate, everything into the nasal cavity. And again, going towards the side behind the torus tuberous, again you can see how nicely you can go behind the torus tuberous from this side. So wherever I feel I have not been able to, if the torus tuberous is too large, I take this route and clean up the area behind the torus tuberous. So I can clean up the fossa Rosenmuller absolutely completely from there also. And then again, as I showed you, I'll just fast forward this part also, right? So because there's no point wasting time. And as you can see here, now you can see that I'm not very sure about seeing the buccopharyngeal fascia as clearly as I was able to see from the nasal cavity side, from the head-on view. This is a side-on view, so I'm not very comfortable seeing the buccopharyngeal fascia. And therefore, I said that this oral side is restricted in my practice to 10%, 5 to 10% of the patients only, where there's no scope for me to go through the nose. Otherwise, I prefer the nasal side. So I'll just quickly run to the last part of it. And you can see that this is the bulge I was talking about, that beyond this bulge, you have the adenoids which go inside, because that's the normal lordosis. The last part where the skull is attached to the cervical spine, and therefore you have to that part is actually more deeper. But you have seen the buccopharyngeal fascia, you have seen the periosteum, and that's how you can still make sure that you do not get a recurrence in even this small child. So the minimum age to perform adenoidectomy, as I said, is usually 1 year and above, because if the child is smaller than that, you have, as I said, adenoids react to steroids. And if you give steroid in oral form or spray form, you will at least be able to buy some time till your child is at least 10 kg, so that it is safe for anesthesia. The size of the airway is big, so that the secretions do not block your tube. It's very safe for the anesthesia point of view. Otherwise, if the anesthetist allows me, I'm absolutely happy to operate adenoids at 6 months of age. There's no problem at all from surgical point of view, but usually 1 year and above. Why? Because the child is more suitable for anesthesia by that age.
Because,
again,
sorry, a small update to you.
Yes.
There are more than 1,400 participants as of now.
Yes.
And you have more than 78 questions so far. So you
Okay.
just try to pace it. By the
Okay,
end
fine.
of your talk, I think
Sure.
at least 100 questions will be there.
Fine. We are going to go till 9:30. I believe people will
Okay.
like to wait.
All right then.
So now, see, again, I have waited on this patient. I have waited for the patty to work, and you can see space is created. She has got a deviated septum on the left side and turbinate hypertrophy on the right. I'll fast forward the videos in interest of time, because you have already seen unedited videos. So these are all unedited videos, but I'm fast forwarding to show you the steps again, starting from the top, defining the superior boundary. Again here, defining the superior boundary, the periosteum at the top. Then again, removing tissues layer by layer. I'm just fast forwarding. And this is an unedited video, right? So you remove tissues as we have done earlier. I'm just fast forwarding. And now you go into the third dimension. Again, go into the fossa of Rosenmuller on the right side. See the buccopharyngeal fascia at the back. It is a normal anatomy. Every single case of adenoid, you will see this anatomy, these boundaries. You can see the fascia at the back, Passament's ridge at the lower part. And as you have seen, I have already taken care of the adenoids on the torus tuberis also here. So once you reach here, the right side job is almost over. And then you go in from the left side. Again, starting from the top, the superior boundary defined. Absolutely the same steps you can follow in almost all cases, unless you have some important variation. But the same thing, you can see the torus tuberis. This is the adenoid and this is the torus tuberis. So you'll remove the lymphoid tissues from the torus tuberis without touching the muscle. And this is one action you cannot do without anything. Now you see this. See, there's a small vessel. I have not coagulated. I'll just play that part again. Now I'll let this play and see what will happen. See, I just put some videos, whatever was there in my laptop, I just copied and pasted, because every video has something to teach you. Now, if you are a little fast and in the depth, so suddenly you'll hit a vessel, but there's no need to coagulate. You keep on ablating. See, I have not coagulated. I'm keeping on ablating. So even the ablation, but don't do that when you are on the fascia. You do not ablate on the fascia, or very near to the fascia, you have to coagulate. So this is again one point was interesting. Again, I will keep on fast forwarding. Again, last bit of adenoid. You can see the fascia all around, and fine paintbrush. Remove all the tissues, fine work. See the fascia all around. And whatever little tissue is there, you are ablating. And again, finally, if you are sure that you cannot ablate anymore, then you will coagulate whatever tissue is left. This is the central part where the tissues are a little more, right? So, and then each and every corner, then as I said earlier, on this side, don't direct laterally, direct medially. I will again fast forward, right? So that's it. So that's the adenoid completely removed. And this patient, you obviously understand, even if allergy is there, it will not require another surgery, and you can always give. Again, only showing the fine work. Again, starting from the top. Why I'm repeating this video, so that everybody has, clear idea about the steps. Again, same steps. I'm just fast forwarding. Same steps. Why? Because you'll see the same structure every time. It's normal anatomy. It was not only described. Now see here again, I am removing tissues over the torus tuberis. Whatever is extra over the torus tuberis, you can still remove these tissues, because I will show in the end what can happen if you do not do this. Okay, so you remove this, and this is a revision adenoid. I muted so that the revision adenoid, you can see all this evidence of the previous surgery. And this is a 6 or 7 year old child. So again, you do the same things. See how much of adenoid was still left. Again, you go till the fascia, remove so much of adenoid was left. Again, you get the fascia all around. So this is a standard surgery. Now, adult adenoids. Now see, this is an adult adenoid in a pilot. See how large is the adenoid? Huge. And this is a pilot. So obviously he cannot be a 12-year-old. He's a pilot in Malaysian airline. And see his mustache, right? It is only to prove that this is an adult patient. And okay, so what came here? So not only child, you get adenoids in 23-year-old. Now, what is the difference? See this adenoid in a 23-year-old. It's looking really tough and vascular. So many times the adult adenoids, because of recurrent infections, become tough and vascular. So a lot of questions would be that do adenoids always go? So I'm showing that 23-year-old, a lot of adenoids here. See, they're not cutting easily. And can you see, it looks like charring because you're cutting, but it's very tough. Adult adenoids are tough. So this is the difference. See, they're becoming black. The childhood, see this. Now you have to remove all this. These adult adenoids are a different ball game altogether. And many times these adults, because of sleep disturbance, they smoke. They're smokers. They have allergy. And these adult adenoids are totally different ball game. And let me tell you that they're very, very commonly seen and very difficult. If you have not done 100 to 100 adenoids nicely in the children, adult adenoids will give you a very, very tough time. They're not easy. See how they are. They're absolutely different from inside. So I am supposed to show you these videos because this is a session completely on adenoids. So even if you have to sit till 10, please make sure, my friends, your dinner can be delayed by half an hour, 45 minutes, doesn't matter. But see this, it's a totally different ball game. And these adenoids have sometimes taken more than a wand. They sometimes have to spend 2 wands to remove the adenoids, because I do a lot of adult sleep apnea and many of them have adenoids since childhood. Because of adenoids, they have been snoring. Because of snoring, their palates have become long and they'll end up with a palate surgery because the proper adenoid or tonsil surgery and adenoid and tonsil surgery was not done in childhood. So please do not shy away from operating tonsil adenoids in childhood. You will do a great, favor to your pediatric patients, because when they grow as adults, see the adenoid, it's not just cutting. I'm trying, it's not cutting. It's taking so much of time. It's so tough. I will fast forward because again, the time is a constraint, but this is how it gives difficulty in cutting, right? So again, steps would remain the same, but you have to go till the fascia even in adults, because now see, that's the fascia. That's the normal anatomy. As I said, once you reach the fascia, then everything becomes the same, but the adenoid tissue itself is absolutely different in adults, most of the adults, as compared to children. And it's going to take twice as much time and twice as much of wand. And still you have to do a complete job. So I'll just fast forward. So I wanted to show you, this is the adenoid and this is a 39-year-old. Now see, this is again a sleep apnea patient. See how bad is how vascular, how angry the adenoid is looking. Now, if this adenoid, you try to operate with microdebrider, people who say that they can do a good job with microdebrider, I dare to say any surgeon on this earth, including my best friends, I dare, if anybody would operate on these adenoids with microdebrider, they'll have a tough time. So I'll not waste time. It is the same thing, but let me tell you, these adenoids are really vascular. Please, please, please do not do them with microdebrider. Use coblation for these adenoids, adult adenoids, especially in smokers, allergic rhinitis, and sleep apnea patients when the adenoids are large. So coming to adenoidectomy in cleft palate and submucosal cleft palate. See, you have to understand that cleft palate or submucosal cleft palate, here there is no cleft palate, it is submucosal cleft palate. It's a very, very gray area, whether to do adenoidectomy or not. What will happen if you perform adenoidectomy is a very, very common question. I was asked that in the tonsil lecture. So there are different grades of submucosal cleft palate. If you only see a small bifid uvula, absolutely no problem. If your muscle, if you see that your palate is going and touching at the back, if there's no submucosal cleft palate beyond, do as you do it regularly, because it is only the levator palati and the tensor palati, the action of these muscles. If that muscle is normal, you don't bother about a submucosal cleft palate. Involving only the uvula. If it is a bifid uvula, just forget about it. If it is a bifid uvula with only the lower part of the palate being, cleft, and you see that the upper part is working well, there's no eustachian tube dysfunction, and when on saying E, the palate is going and touching at the back, and you are sure you are seeing the contraction of this muscle, please go ahead and remove the adenoids. But in this case also, what is the indication of removing adenoids? It is the eustachian tube mostly, because in this case you will not have obstructive sleep apnea because the palate is already opened up from down. So leave the central part of the adenoid, remove the sides, remove from the near the eustachian tubes, and you will be able to do your job. Why? Because this is the action of the tensor palati, which is ahead, which is in the higher part of the soft palate. I showed this animation many a times. This is the tensor palati, and this is the action of the levator palati. If these actions are normal, any submucosal cleft palate below this action doesn't matter. This is what I said in the earlier 2 slides. So please remember that if the action of levator and the tensor is good, forget about the cleft palate downstairs. You don't need to bother. You can do a standard surgery. However, there are different types of soft submucosal cleft I have already explained. And as I said, if the problem is in the eustachian tube dysfunction, why you need to remove the whole adenoid? If there's a big cleft palate, you leave some adenoid tissue in the middle. At least in all submucosal cleft palate, leave a rim of tissue at the passavant ridge. If you leave the tissue at the passavant ridge, this palate will go and touch at the back, and your problem is solved. You can remove whole of the upper adenoid and adenoids on the side and leave it rim at the passavant ridge, and you can still take the patient's sleep problems out, take the eustachian tube problems out for sure. See, whatever you do in submucosal and cleft palates, your adenoidectomy will not cure the patient of the eustachian tube problem because these muscles are not working well. Whatever you do is only going to give you only partial results. So remove upper part of the adenoid, leave a passavant ridge adenoid at the passavant ridge, and you'll not have a complication. Now, this is what I was telling you, that this is my own case. I had done an adenoidectomy around 7-8 years back, and after 6-7 years, this guy comes to me with a blockage again in nasopharynx, and what it was a tubal tonsil hypertrophy. It was so much that it was blocking the choana. I'll just show it to you from the front. So this child had become an adult, and he came to me with sleep apnea, and see the tubal tonsil hypertrophy. Because initially I did not used to do the tubal tonsils. I used to leave it absolutely like that. Now I remove the lymphoid tissue on that, so that does not hypertrophy. So this is tubal tonsil hypertrophy. Try to search any video on the internet if you get. There's no video. I could not search any video onto the World Wide Web. So I did this tubal tonsil 5-minute job. Only, ablation of the lymphoid tissue over the tubal tonsils. See, a complete adenoidectomy was performed, but this is what happens because they are lymphoid tissue. Now that's the eustachian tube, and I'm going right near the eustachian tube, but I'll remain 5 millimeter away. Always remain 5 millimeter, at least 5 millimeter away from the eustachian tube orifice. Remove, ablate all the lymphoid tissue, but do not ablate muscle, because then you will induce the dysfunction of the eustachian tube because of that reason. So this is how I removed. Now see how much of space is created. This is a very, very interesting thing too. And same thing was done on the other side. So now under local anesthesia, if you have to do adenoidectomy, I am purposefully not showing any video. I do not recommend. But if you have to do it for some reason, if you cannot give anesthesia and you have to give some airway, then you do it under local anesthesia, scope from one nostril and one from the other nostril. I have done it in 1 or 2 cases in the initial part of my practice, when there was a large tongue base and my anesthetist said that they cannot they cannot even give anesthesia to the patient. So they wanted some nasal airway. So without giving any sedation to the patient, I created some space and then put in a nasopharyngeal airway whereby they could give anesthesia. So never do never try to do a complete surgery. You will not be able to do a complete surgery. And if you have bleeding, you had it. So never do adenoidectomy under local anesthesia. You can make some debulk a little part of it for some nasopharyngeal airway to go in. And this is around 9 o'clock. So thank you. I am already a little late, but I will stop sharing my screen. Sagar, you can come online. Dr. Sagar. So I'm thankful to everybody for being online, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Sagar, can we take the questions?
Yeah. Hello.
No, you're still mute. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah,
Hello.
Yeah, Sagar.
Hi.
Yeah.
Fabulous, fantastic lecture on adenoidectomy. I think you covered A to Z on adenoid surgeries.
Thank
excellent,
you,
excellent. As I told before, it was like watching an amazing movie. So you have a tough time, my buddy. You have nearly 100 questions.
So you have
very good.
You have a tough time. You sort out the important ones.
I know. So very good questions are there. Nearly 1,500 participants are watching it.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
So let me go ahead with the questions in the order of it appearing. All right. So Dr. Tarun Oja from Jaipur has asked this question. Is there any complication in this procedure which you never want to happen at a senior consultant level?
So what complications can happen? You can have bleeding during the procedure. If there's a bleeding during the procedure, you can very easily control it. And as I said, sir, Dr. Tarun, I have done a workshop with him in Jaipur, I think 7-8 years back. So if once your hands are set, there'll be no bleeding in the adenoids, which you'll not be able to control with coblation for sure. But in the initial parts of your practice, when you're not used to the coblation, then you might have some difficulty in controlling the bleeding. In that case, you pack it, wait for some time, let the flow reduce, because if you're not seeing from where it is bleeding, then it will not stop. And you try to coagulate, it will never work. So you keep on ablating the nearby tissue so that you reach the area where actually it is bleeding. Then you can either see it and coagulate, or you can keep on ablating and the bleeding will stop. Now in the post-operative period, if you have coagulated your area very nicely, it will never have a bleeding in the post-operative period. I have had only one case which has, had mild trickle in the post-operative period in so many years. I'm not saying, see, every surgeon can have complications, but in the post-operative period, once you have done a good job, this area will not get secondarily infected because there's no food going through there. And you are anyway washing the nose, giving everything. So I had one case, a 17-year-old boy who had very bad adenoids. He came with a little ooze and we admitted him, conservatively managed, give some IV pause and this and that. It was managed. So the second thing can be your secondary infection. Obviously, you are giving nasal douche, you are giving antibiotics. So secondary infection is not a problem in the nose and nasopharynx. And is there any other complication you can think of, Sagar?
I think if, as you had rightly put in your presentation, by chance, if your active electrode touches the soft palate, lateral wall, there could be a chance of stenosis.
Absolutely.
I had seen a patient done by someone else who had this circumferential narrowing. So that is one thing that I think you have told very clearly how to avoid it also.
Yeah, I think, Sagar, you saw that in every case I start from the top and go right from septum to the lateral wall.
Yes.
And, ablate the whole thing. So I'm creating a raw area on the top, right from septum to the lateral wall. And it's almost 120, 125 or 150 degrees. Why? Because upper wall is a bony wall. It cannot contract. Upper wall, you can absolutely do, it cannot contract. So you can remove the whole 120, 130 degrees, but laterally and down. Laterally and down are soft tissues. Laterally, you have the torus tuberous, the eustachian tube orifice, and inferiorly, your wand can touch the posterior part of the soft palate.
Yeah. So the next question is from Dr. Rajesh Krannan in Kumli. In children with adenoid hypertrophy and DNS with obstructive symptoms, how do you manage, sir? What is the age limit to start steroid nasal spray?
So
think you have
Dr.
answered
Dr.
it.
Rajesh has attended almost all our workshops. He has asked question yesterday also.
Okay.
Dr. Rajesh, see, if there's septal deviation, turbinate hypertrophy, adenoid, sinus, it's nose. So do everything at one go. Whatever is required. If the child is 2, 3, 4-year-old, obviously you're not going to correct your septum. You're not going to do a lot of turbinate work. You're not going to treat sinus. But if the child is 12, 13 years of age, I do everything at one go. In the nose part, in our talk on nose, I think it's on Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm going to tackle that. So you do everything at one time and tackle your septum, turbinate, sinus, whatever you want to tackle all along with. The rule is that if you're doing so many things at one time, take the distalmost as the first. Do the adenoids first, because once you do the adenoid, if you do the septum first or the sinus first, the blood will keep trickling and you'll not be able to do the adenoid nicely. So do the adenoid and do everything. What is the minimum age to do the surgery? Septoplasty anywhere from 6 to 7 years of age. I will discuss on that day. Age to start the nasal spray. See, 6 months onwards, you can start mometazone. Long-term mometazone, you can start 6 months onward. See, if the child is even smaller, you can use it for 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, 15 days. You can give drops or spray. 2 years onwards, you can start fluticasone furoate. So there's no problem.
Yeah. The next question, Dr. Shweta from Vijayawada has asked, post-coblation adenoidectomy, you get some foul smelling complaint from the patients. So what is it due to? How do you avoid it?
Correct. So whenever you get a foul smell, it's because of what? It's because of slough, which is getting infected. When a slough is going to get infected, what tissue will get infected? Any tissue which is not vital, which is dead, which is burnt, which will get infected and will give you a foul smell. It will decompose and give you either it is decomposed or it is getting infected. So if you have a clean surface, which I showed you, which is not burnt, which is not, there's no devitalized tissue. This is the difference between coblation and radiofrequency or cautery. That in radiofrequency and cautery, you coagulate tissue and burn it. So that burnt tissue will decompose. But in coblation, the tissue which is removed is completely removed. The tissue which is there is totally healthy. Only a very little amount of tissue is the proteins are coagulated, but these are healthy tissues. These proteins, so whatever smell you get is only in cases when there's a lot of slough formation and you're not giving nasal douche. The slough is not getting formed. Yes, and you are getting secondary bacterial infection. So give douching, do a good job. Give douching, nothing will happen.
Then Dr. Chidananda from Bangalore. What is the incidence of reactionary hemorrhage in coblation technique?
So reactionary hemorrhage is now actually covered into primary hemorrhage. Primary hemorrhage is hemorrhage on the table as well as till 24 hours. If you're
also asked, sorry.
So let me answer this question.
Yeah.
So see, whenever you are ablating, I answered that question. If your speed is very fast, then the hemostatic function of the coblation has not worked. In that case, what will happen is that your ablation has happened, but your vessels have not coagulated. So if your speed is fast, your vessel is not coagulated completely, and this will open up later. If the saline flow is very fast, again, the same thing can happen. So these are the two conditions in which your coagulation itself is incomplete, and then you can have a secondary hemorrhage. If you have done a nice job with this, secondary hemorrhage will not happen. It's very, very rare. Yeah. Next.
I think he has also asked the same Dr. Siddhanand from Bangalore.
So we have
most pediatricians avoid adenoid surgery, even in grade 4 adenoids. How do we convince the referral pediatrician?
Very nice. Now see, for ENTs, we have to convince our pediatric patients, pediatric friends, that adenoidectomy is required in grade 3 and grade 4. Grade 1, grade 2, as I said, steroid spray is good enough. So you must talk to your pediatric friends. You must take lectures. Like I almost every 1 month or 2 months, I take lectures from my pediatric friends where I explain them what is the problem if there's a blockage, what is the nasal airflow is not happening, and what is the harm if adenoidectomy is not done about the mouth, the changes in the oral structure. And what is the advantage of doing an adenoidectomy? And the fact that you are only removing the adenoid, you're not removing the other part of the Waldear's ring, so that rest of the tissues are there. You're not even doing tonsillectomy if it is not required. You're doing tonsillotomy leaving behind tonsils. So you're leaving behind some immune function for them to work, and your pediatric friend will be very happy. If you say that we are only removing, if the guard of the house is so fat that is not letting you in, we are only trimming the tummy of the guard. This is a good way I generally try to explain my patients as well as pediatric friends.
So good explanation. The next question, I think this is the same question asked by two of the colleagues, Dr. Pradeep Kumar and Dr. Abhishek Kumar. Abhishek Kumar from Patna and Pradeep Kumar from Bangalore.
Dr. Pradeep is a very, very senior doctor. I visited his center.
Yeah.
And Abhishek was my junior in KEM, from KEM.
So their question is adenoidectomy in nocturnal enuresis and its relation with the disease, and what's your opinion?
So as I have already explained, nocturnal enuresis is generally because of disruption of the sleep waves. Suddenly from the deep sleep, from say stage 3 sleep, the patient is disturbed. So that stimulation to the brain, because of a disturbance in the breathing, which is caused because of the adenoids, causes nocturnal enuresis. Most of the patients whom I have operated for adenoidectomy, on the same day, their enuresis have gone away. Having said that, some patients, the enuresis did not completely go away, but it reduced. No patient has not benefited from it. Every patient has benefited from adenoidectomy, if it is grade 3, grade 4.
And Dr. Shah has asked from Patna, what is the reason for the nocturnal enuresis?
No, I have already explained this.
Okay. So the next question is Dr. PVLN Murthy from Hyderabad.
Yes, Dr. Murthy.
Yeah, the boundaries are well oriented in first position. What about in rose position, which is convenient for adenoidectomy and tonsillectomy? As saline fluid is good in rose position when compared to fifth position.
Correct. So boundaries would obviously remain the same. Our orientation changes. So as you saw, when I am doing it from the first position, I keep my 70-degree scope looking upwards. What Dr. Naveen Patel from Ahmedabad, he does, he rotates the camera. While after doing the tonsillectomy, he will put the camera from the oral cavity and he rotates the camera. So once you rotate the camera 180 degree, your orientation becomes as you see in the first position. The orientation becomes the same. So you see Dr. Naveen Patel's video, and this is again a very, very good technique. You can do that, and I also like it. Dr. Patel does adenoidectomy fabulously, and this is his technique. So this is the answer to your question.
So I have also done the same technique by keeping in the rose position and
rotating the camera.
Yeah, rotating the camera and doing the same thing. Yeah.
Perfect. Next.
So Dr. Shreyas Pradeep from Bangalore.
Yeah.
Do you recommend use of 90-degree or 70-degree endoscope through mouth to perform the same? I think you have answered it.
So 70 degree is the commonest because see 90 degrees, if you have a 90 degree, you can put 90 degree. You'll have to pull up the palate even lesser. But your wand is not going to be bent by 90 degree. You are only going to bend it by 45 degree at the most. You cannot bend it really more than that. So 70 degree is the best endoscope.
Dr. Amarnath from Visakhapatnam, sir, do you put shoulder roll? I think you have answered.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. There is a question from Dr. Shiva Balaji. He has asked, hello, sir, can you please elaborate the Kodak procedure? Can you show the video again?
So you have already said that Kodak is first doing it by debrider and then using the adenoid. Let's go to the next one.
Dr. Mohan Kulhari from Jaipur.
Yeah.
Choice of the wand, which is better for only adenoidectomy and which is only better for both adenoid and tonsil.
So Dr. Mohan, you have already visited my center. I use EVAC 70 for almost everything. Though Precise Max is a much aggressive wand and you can do adenoidectomy a little faster than what you can do with EVAC 70. But then you have to have a wand separately for the adenoid. And second thing is that when going near the fascia, it has got a very broad tip. And I believe that unless, see, as an expert, you can do it with anything. If you give me a max, I will do it as fast or even faster. But max, first of all, it is 2-3 grand more in cost. You have to have a separate wand for that. And you saw with EVAC 70 also, I showed you all the videos with EVAC 70. You can do a very good job. But in adult adenoids, as I told you, the adenoids are really tough. So in adult adenoids, I feel Precise Max has a better cutting power. Next.
All right. Next one, Dr. Rajiv Pastapur from Kalaburgi.
Yeah.
Have you anytime encountered a troublesome bleeding at the fossa of Rosenmuller? Please tell us how to manage.
Fine. So as I told in my talk itself, that laterally you get all the pharyngeal vessels. They all come from laterally. So if you direct your wand laterally and ablate, then you can get a pharyngeal vessel. If it is large, it will have a torrential bleed. Very, very rarely you'll have a carotid which is so close that you will actually injure. In that case, you'll see the carotid pulsations even otherwise. So you will not be a fool to go and open up the carotid. But I have seen carotids coming in very, very close at the, but it is not in the fossa of Rosenmuller, it's little lower down. Carotid is closer to in the lower down part, not in the fossa of Rosenmuller. But in the fossa of Rosenmuller, the skull base is the thinnest. So you do not know when the bone is deficient. You have not done a CT scan. So it's always better to go a little, safe. Do not use very high ablation. Go layer by layer. See what you are doing, as I have already explained in my video. And in the lower part, do not go laterally ablating. If you are unable to see, coagulate. Otherwise, rotate your wand medially, see it by pressing the torus tuberous, pull the whole tissue medially and see it under vision. Or use a 70-degree, see it from down and then see that area and do it. Then you will not get it. But if at all you get a bleeding, then you have to pack, let it stop and then use a bipolar and that should be it. There is no artery which is very, very large which cannot be stopped over there.
Interestingly, Vikas, I just want to share one quick experience of mine, wherein this parapharyngeal carotid was actually coming just in the median plane. It was taking a bend like this and it was coming up. We were able to see that. Luckily, we were seeing the.
So obviously, you will not go deep in that case, very, very surely.
See what it was actually, and it was a parapharyngeal carotid. We were lucky, yeah.
So but be careful.
We followed the same thing what you told.
You will see the pulsations. See
exactly.
See, adenoid is a submucosal structure. Before hitting any tissue, you'll have to open the mucosa and submucosa. You'll have to hit the buccopharyngeal fascia. Then you'll get the muscles, and then only you'll get anything else.
Right. The next question. Dr. Amitabh Malik from Gurgaon.
Hi,
he has asked, what are the chances of recurrence if you leave only a thin layer of adenoid tissue over the posterior pharyngeal wall?
Absolutely fine, because see, a thin layer of lymphoid tissue is anywhere over the whole pharyngeal surface, and so there's absolutely no problem in leaving very, very thin tissue. But I showed you, I have also left a very small thin sliver of tissue. It's not really necessary to see the fascia absolutely blank, but leave as less tissue as possible so that it does not give you granulopharyngitis in that area. Then there will be post-nasal drip which will keep on happening.
Dr. Satish from Vijayawada, he has asked a question. Have you ever come across neck rigidity post-adenoidectomy due to injuring the
Absolutely.
fascia?
So Dr. Satish, when I went first time in my life without reading about it, without seeing anybody doing it, when I started going till the end of the adenoid in revision cases, I hit the buccopharyngeal fascia. I opened it, right? And I used to call it the perimysium at that time. You remember in 2010-11, I used to call it perimysium. Perimysium is the covering of one single muscle sheath. So obviously this is the fascia. So that was my mistake.
Yes.
So when I opened up the muscle, these are the vertical muscles. When you open up the muscle on day 3, day 4, these muscles will get inflamed. And inflamed muscle, when you lift your head, the patient will get pain. So this is the only thing you will get, and that will last for 2 weeks till it completely heals. So do not open up the fascia. This is a complication if you open up the fascia, but nothing more than that will happen. You give good antibiotics, wait for 2 weeks, everything will settle down.
Dr. Lavan, again from Vijayawada, he has asked, is it possible always to differentiate the adenoid tissue from the normal tissue as you go posteriorly?
Always, because this is the natural anatomy. So your camera has to be good, your scope has to be good. If you are using a single chip scope, still you can differentiate it. Still, single chip good endoscope. Yes, if you're using a security camera for operating, obviously you may not be able to. But any good scope camera and a good scope, you'll be able to differentiate it because it's normal. It's a very different color I showed you.
Dr. Ganesh Bangar from Hingoli, I think you have answered it. What is the minimum age for adenoidectomy?
Go to the
Yeah.
next one.
Yeah. Dr. Shreyas Pradeep from Bangalore. During adenoidectomy, does intermittent use of coagulation mode make it difficult to ablate over the area later?
Yeah, so that's what, when you are coagulating, you're making the tissue tough. When you are ablating, as I showed, when the tissue is tough, it's difficult to ablate as in adult adenoids. So you want the area to remain soft. So if you intermittently coagulate, then ablating is difficult. So where do I use this? I use it on the base tongue. When I'm going there, I use it only in the base tongue area where I want to really, make sure that it doesn't bleed. So I first coagulate and then ablate. But otherwise, in the adenoids, it's not really recommended.
Dr. Smrita Chandra from Bangalore. Can we send tissue for HPE by this method?
No, because see, the tissue is no longer accumulated. It's all gone into the suction. It has become vapor and it's absorbed. So you can, if you want to take tissue, you first take a biopsy and then do the surgery.
Dr. Sridhar Simhadri from Visakhapatnam. Did you have any case of stenosis of nasopharynx in children post-coagulation?
Luckily, not in my own hands. I have seen one case from a friend of mine, but luckily not in my hand. This is the worst ever thing you can do. Therefore, I said your metal should not touch the back of your soft palate.
I think we have answered this question, but I'll just read it out. Dr. Sunil Balajirao from Nanded. He has asked, what is the chances of injuring carotids? Do you assess the position of carotid preoperatively and how?
No. So we have already answered this. We have already answered. Go to the next one.
Yeah. Dr. Harnath from Tirupati. How to prevent clogging of the wand?
So as I said, for preventing clogging of the wand, there should not be any tissue going into the wand. That means the ablation process has to be complete before it is absorbing. That means you have to give good saline flow. You have to have adequate speed of movement, and then you have to get adequate suction. Not too less a suction, not too much of a suction. Not too less saline, not too much of saline. And adequate speed. These are the three factors. Correct speed, correct suction, and correct irrigation. Your wand will. Did you see my wand blocking even once?
Perfect.
No, but it takes time. It's easier said than done. Initially, in my first 15-20 cases, my anesthetist was saying, what horrible thing you have taken. What is this? I will not come for giving anesthesia if you use this again.
Yeah. So you have a very good question here now. What happened here? Okay. So Dr. Santosh Kulkarni from Kolhapur.
Hi, Dr. Santosh.
What is the propensity of aerosol generation by a microdebrider vis-a-vis Kodak microdebrider, which I think is relevant in COVID and post-COVID scenario?
Okay, so first of all, there's absolutely no need to do any adenoid surgery till I think next 6 months. 6 months no one is looking at doing an adenoid surgery. We are still discussing, but after 6 months, you can look at this video again. 6 months, don't do any adenoid surgery. If at all you have to do it. If suppose, hypothetically, if you're doing adenoidectomy, in microdebrider, the tissues will actually jump, right? In coblation, what will happen? The tissue will evaporate. Tissue will be converted into, all the proteins will be converted into carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. So no virus can remain intact. And all the fumes are getting intact. So if at all I have to do a surgery in COVID on adenoid, I will use coblation on anything. But obviously it's not safe because all the other respiratory, every pumping, everything else except this fume will contain virus.
Interestingly, because just to get you some information from the recent literatures, it is quoted that microdebrider is much more safer than cautery or radiofrequency or any
Because there's no fume
thing
created.
generated by that.
Because there's
Yeah.
no fume generated. I agree with
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
But then the blood will be there, na?
Yeah. So the next question is Ajay from Rajmundry. Hello, sir. Can you please once again elaborate the Kodak procedure with the note on holding the endoscope, debrider blade you use?
Now you do that later on.
At the end, I
Next
will
one.
show that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think you have told about this. Dr. Hitesh Shah from Amreli, how to prepare the nose for endoscope insertion. I think you have showed it very nicely before. Dr. Danyarajan from Trivandrum, speed of the wand and wand setting.
I have already.
And again, I think you have told
9 and 4 and correct speed.
Yes. Gustav Das Biswas from Kolkata, how to identify the buccopharyngeal fascia.
I have already discussed. Next.
And I'm just going to go to, how long you use intranasal sprays and how long you use oral steroids.
So oral steroid you can give safely for 1 to 2 weeks. If it is beyond 1 week, you'll need to taper down. For 1 week, you need not even taper down. Spray you can use for as long as you want. Spray, I mean, for allergic rhinitis, we use it for years and years together. Even in children, you can safely give it for 3 to 6 months and then reassess. And if required, you can again restart. So there's no problem with the nasal spray. They are shown to not suppress the hypothalamic pituitary axis, especially mometazone.
Dr. Santosh Kulkarni again from Kolhapur. How do you address the case of cleft palate repaired with the significant adenoid hypertrophy? I think you have given a very good case.
Yeah.
Can a curettage adenoidectomy under endoscopic guidance can be combined with coablation to complete the procedure and achieve total ablation?
Why not? Why not? But I only suggest that after curettage, wait for, keep it packed for 7 to 8 minutes till your bleeding time, clotting time is taken care of, so that the whole bleeding will completely stop. Then you give it a wash, like Satish does. Give it a wash, remove all the blood, and then use the coablation.
Yeah. Then we have Dr. Priyadarshan from Kanur. When adenoidectomy is done, as in the presentation, do you pack the throat because obviously there is will be saline in the throat?
Absolutely.
During coablation?
See, during any procedure of the throat, it's always better to pack the throat. Having said that, if only saline is going to enter lungs, nothing will happen. Saline will get absorbed from the lungs. Problem is saliva. It's not for the saline that I'm packing it for the saliva, because some saliva will also enter the lung. That will be a problem. Saline is not a problem. Some amount of blood, when you are inexperienced, there will be some bleeding. Blood and saliva should not enter your lungs, and that is the reason for packing.
Again, Dr. Amitabh Malik from Gurgaon, any tips for working around DNS with spur?
So we'll talk, Amitabh, on the day on the nasal surgery. I'm going to, yeah.
Dr. Veena from Bangalore, microdebrider assisted adenoidectomy. Apart from bleeding, any other advantage?
So with microdebrider, you will be able to go closer to the fascia, and then there will be maximum bleeding because all the blood vessels come from the fascia. Like Satish Jain very nicely does a very, very good and complete adenoidectomy with microdebrider. I mean, it's as good as you do with the coablation, but then it is Satish Jain. He is not a normal ENT surgeon. He's he's a legend.
Phenomenal.
So see, in a legend's hand, anything will work. So if you are a normal surgeon, what is easier? Easier is coablation. With coablation, there will be no bleeding, so you will be able to do a good job predictably every time. If you are Satish Jain, you can do a very good work, better than my coablation, with microdebrider on the buccopharyngeal fascia. See, Satish, we were demonstrating in one of the workshops together, and Satish bola, "Chal, let's see, kaun acha karta hai." Main bola, I mean, I'm sure he took more time. I finished in 15 minutes. He took around 30 minutes. Doesn't matter. But he did an equally good job with the microdebrider, man. So, see, I have done that. I used to use microdebrider for a long time. My adenoidectomy was not as complete as I can do with the coablation.
And I think the other advantage is obviously it is less expensive, to answer her question.
Correct.
SVD Prakash from Vijayawada, what is your advice using Precise Max for adenoid surgery?
I have already explained adults and
So Dhruvakumar Mehta from Bangalore, cause of grade 5 adenoids, if you feel such cases or more, comparative stats with curettage.
So why grade 5s are more, I do not know, but there are a lot of grade 5s that I get. They're coming into the nostril. There's no space for me to put in the, scope is only seeing the adenoid like this. You cannot even put your wand. So then I go from down with a 70 degree, I make some space, then I put my wand inside and start doing it.
Dr. Hitesh Shatapara from Morbi. Sir, is it not necessary to send biopsy in adult adenoid?
So most of the time, it will be only a hypertrophy or hyperplasia of the adenoids. Most of the time, it is not non-Hodgkin's lymphoma if that you are trying to say. If in case of an adult, you see very large tonsils, which are not looking normal, they are a little hard than normal. The adenoid is hard than normal. Then I would possibly take a biopsy before doing the adenoidectomy. See, because even if it is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I need a biopsy. If I am very sure that it is bleeding like a, see, I have operated on a girl with nasopharyngeal carcinoma. I thought it was adenoid, a 19-year-old girl. I took it as an adenoid, and the moment I went inside, it was bleeding on touch. I said, no, it's not adenoid. Then I took a biopsy and it was just bleeding. So I took it and then cauterized it, and it came out as squamous cell, nasopharyngeal carcinoma. I have operated on many lymphomas to give them space to breathe. So after I give them space to breathe, I send them for, after 1 month or so, they go for their chemo. So whenever you have a strong suspicion, you can take biopsy, and there's no harm in taking a biopsy. If you want to do it. But in KEM hospital, we have done a lot of biopsies. It doesn't come like that.
Yeah, now I'm going to combine some questions.
I remember a case from Raipur, a 60-year-old male. See, if he did not have tonsil enlargement, if he did not have adenoid enlargement since childhood, why suddenly in last 2 months, 3 months, he has got an enlargement? So ENT surgeon referred, he said, no, I am seeing this patient for 20 years. Now he's got enlargement. So in those cases, please take a biopsy. If it is continued one, don't bother. Go ahead.
I'm going to combine few of the questions.
Yes.
Because Dr. Rahul Shah from Surat and Dr. Balaji has asked, number 1, how to prevent nasal regurgitation. Number 2, sir, can Kodak be done in adults as it would save the coablative wand?
Correct. So as I told you, adenoidectomy as such can never give rise to regurgitation. There's no question of regurgitation. What happens is that there's a hypernasality in the child in which you do adenoidectomy, because the child's soft palate is not used to going that behind because of the adenoid. It's not working. And then you have also done a tonsillectomy. The child also has pain. Right. So because of pain of tonsillectomy, the palate is not moving. Palate was not used to going behind. Now the child is speaking like this. Hi, my name is Vikas Agrawal. This is how the child will speak after an adenoidectomy. Right. So this is only temporary. You ask the child to say, don't say A, say A, and the child will start speaking. So within 1 to 2 weeks, everything will be over. If you have done a good job, there's no question of a regurgitation.
All right. Dr. Jaganmohan Reddy from Narsarapeta. Interesting question. In case of narrow nostrils, I am passing a cannula, which is used for canine fossa puncture, and then keep the 0-degree endoscope through it. The cannula prevent blurring of the scope while passing in and out. What is your opinion?
No, come again. The question I did not understand.
So what he is saying is, in narrow nostrils, he passes a cannula that is used for canine puncture. Through the cannula, he passes the 0-degree endoscope, so that the cannula will prevent the blurring of the scope while passing in and out. What is your
I have already answered that your scope once inside should not come out. If you have to do in and out, then you rather work on your technique of surgery. Having said that, if you think that you'll require to do that, you can do anything. There's absolutely no problem. But you can always out-fracture the inferior turbinate, decongest it, and then do it. But I'm absolutely fine, Dr. Reddy. There's no harm in doing what you do. But what I'm saying is your scope once inside should not come out before completing the job.
All right. I think many other questions. What is coming up is...
Go ahead. It's only 9:30.
Okay. Dhruvam Kumar Mehta from Bangalore. Comparative stats with curettage, incidence of grade 5 adenoids in your practice.
Oh, honestly, I have not done any. I am a very poor statistician. I do not write papers. I like operating only.
Dr. Rahim from Perumbavoor, is there any chance of injury to the internal carotid? I
We
think
have
you have
already
answered
answered.
it.
We have already pick up the questions that we have not
What
answered,
is,
Sagar.
I think you have answered most of it. I'll just read it. Pradeep Kumar from Bangalore again, which is better
Yeah.
technique, transoral both endoscope and wand, or transoral wand and nasal endoscope?
So I have already dealt in great detail about the comparative advantages of both.
Dr. Kastuvdas Biswas from Kolkata, protocol for discharge of patient postoperatively.
8 hours from the time of his coming out of the theater. 6 to 8 hours. The moment he comes out of anesthesia, he's home. Every patient, single patient, has to go home. Why should they stay in the hospital? Even a 2-year-old child.
Dr. Vinay from Gwalior, as most important limitation of curettage method is incomplete removal. What is your view on curettage and with post of intranasal steroids, as there is a lot of difference between cost of both surgery?
No, I totally agree, sir. Sir, I totally agree. But I would suggest, since you have everybody has an endoscope, so put an endoscope, do the curettage, coagulate whatever points with suction cautery as you can, and then give postnasal spray. I'm totally okay with it. If the child cannot afford, if the parents cannot afford coblation, post-operative nasal spray will do a great work. Absolutely okay.
I think Dr. Chaudhary from Vijayawada, with the current viral epidemic, the adenoids have clear role beyond 10 years in combating viral infections by producing T lymphocytes. Is it safe to perform adenoid?
See, current COVID has a 19% mortality rate overall, all ages taken together across the world's best nations. 19%. 81 have gone home, 19 have died. Why you want to do adenoids, any ENT surgery? No ENT surgery, I mean, at least these surgery, tracheostomy is fine. These are absolutely no way, nothing to be done till COVID is under control.
Dr. Rajinikanth from Vijayawada, did you notice a temporary change in voice which recovered after a few weeks?
Yeah, so 3-4 days, yes. See, if you have done a bad job and the child is in pain, then it may, of tonsillectomy, then it will take 1 week or 2 weeks. Otherwise, 3-4 days of voice change is pretty common because the child is not used to moving the palate.
Dr. Sivaram Krishna from Yeluru, any role of oxyspray in grade 2 adenoids along with or without antibiotics?
See, oxyspray is actually oxymetazoline. It does not work on adenoids. It works on the inferior turbinates. So if the turbinates are also large, you give oxyspray to shrink the turbinates and give some fluticasone or mometazone for the adenoids.
Dr. Rahim again, chance of injury to the eustachian tube.
We have already discussed about that. There's absolutely no chance. If you're using endoscope, why should you injure the eustachian tube?
So Dr. Sivabalaji from Vijayawada again, he has asked 2 questions. I think one is, we have seen you operating over the eustachian tubal thing, and this charring, does it not cause any damage to the eustachian tube?
So the question is this: there is no charring. This is why coblation, there is no charring. We only melt the tissues. We do not burn tissues. We melt the tissues at 60 to 70 degrees centigrade. The tissue is melted and whatever tissues there is normal. So muscles are absolutely not affected. So no question of eustachian tube dysfunction.
And the second part of this, his question is again, Kodak can be done in those instances.
So Kodak, you are the boss.
Yeah.
Next.
The last question is, what nasal douches you give and how frequent?
Simple saline nasal, isotonic saline. So you give whatever brand you want, isotonic saline, but you give good amount of washes so that all the secretions in the nose, nasopharynx, will be carried in the throat. So there will be no stinking. All the little tissue which is there, which is say unhealthy, will be washed off.
One more question at the end, Dr. Sujit from Amravati, chances of recurrence.
So if you have done a complete job, I can guarantee you that there will be no recurrence. If you have done a complete job, even if you've done almost little bit less than complete, still your patient will not have any problem. If you leave a lot of tissue behind, then only he will require a revision surgery.
Yeah, I think I'll just show that Kodak procedure once as per their thing, just quickly. Or shall I just?
You have already shown it. You just talk about it.
The video speaks more easier than me telling about
So
it.
basically, you use a
Just
debrider,
doing a
and then
debrider
and then
using a
stop the building
poblator
and
at the
do
end.
poblator.
That's
Yes.
about it. So the final thing is that they have asked, can you make this presentation online?
Yeah, so Dr. Ashwin will answer that question.
Yeah.
So before we, I'm very thankful to Acha.
How long can you use nasal steroid sprays in pediatric and adults?
We have already
I
answered.
think you have answered it, Dr. Prabhakar.
So I thank all the delegates for being there, and I hope I was able to answer your questions and your queries. Thank you, Sagar, and over to Dr. Ashwin.
Yeah, all good things must come to an end. That was an exhaustive and wonderful session by Dr. Vikas Agarwal on the common surgery of head nephrectomy. To answer one question, this video and this recording will be available for 1 month on the same link. You can again go and watch. If you want any queries, if you have any unanswered question, we'll again go back to Dr. Vikas Agarwal and we'll try to answer all the questions. Again, hats off you, Mr. Sir. We have covered almost everything about anatomy. I don't think anything is remaining in adenoids as far as.
No, there is still a lot.
Yeah, but still, in the we have limited time. So within that time, he has covered many things. And thanks to you, sir, with your ingenuity, you have tried to answer 100 questions in 20-30 minutes. So I would like to extend sincere thanks to both of you. Apart from that, I would like to thank the delegates, right from 7:30 to till almost 10. So you are there and you are still asking questions. So that thing that is a big success for all of us. And one more important thing, you can our next program is on Monday, and the topic is surgery on the base of tongue, again with Dr. Vikas Agarwal. Please do log in at the same time at 7:30. At the end of session, you can definitely download the certificate signed by Dr. Vikas Agarwal. I also wanted to
and Dr. Sagar also.
Yeah, and Dr. Sagar also. And I also want to extend my sincere thanks to my entire marketing and sales team because of their tremendous efforts. So many people have logged in, and especially to Sachin and Abhishek. Thank you all. Yes. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation and excellent moderating. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to moderate this wonderful session. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.